So now the next step is probably going to be to add the sign in functionality, because we want sign in to guard the upload functionality. We don't want people to be able to upload videos unless they've actually signed in. And we're not just going to be enforcing that on the UI side, we're also going to be enforcing it server side, and I'll show you how to do that later. But for now, let's focus on the sign in functionality. And we're actually going to navigate back to our Firebase console and back within the project that we created earlier. And we're going to add a web app, just like this is kind of prompting us to do. You can do that using this button here. When you hover it, it says web. When you hover this one, it's Android, and this one is Apple. You can also do that by heading to the project settings, scrolling all the way down and clicking on this icon here. And we're just going to call this app, I guess, YouTube Web Client, just like we kind of named the directory. We're not going to be using Firebase hosting in this case. I think in theory we could for Next.js apps, but I think that's in beta and that feature might not even exist a year from now, so who knows. I'm going to go ahead and register that app. It takes a second and then it kind of prompts us on what we should add to our code. So one, we need to install the Firebase package, so let's remember that. But more importantly, we can take these configurations, these initializations, and copy and paste it into our application code. And I'm going to show you how to do that now. Other than that, there's nothing else we need to look at here. We're just going to continue to console. And if you ever forget those settings, you can always scroll back down here and they should be available to us here. And you can always add additional apps like mobile apps if you wanted to. What I'm going to do is within the app directory on the left-hand side, I'm going to create another folder called Firebase. Now, this might be a bit misleading because we sometimes expect these folders to correspond to a page. So maybe a better practice would be to have like a new folder and call it utilities so that it's clear to us that that's not a page, and then create like the Firebase directory within that. But for simplicity, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and have this a Firebase folder, and I'm going to create a file called Firebase TS. The reason it's not TSX is because this is not going to be a component. This is just going to be some configurations and library code. So I'm going to paste the code that we had earlier. We got an error here, and the reason is because we need to run npm install, and we need to do it in our YouTube web client. So I'm going to navigate into that directory first, and then I'm going to run npm install Firebase. And it took a second, but we got rid of that error that we wanted. I'm going to get rid of these to-dos. You can go ahead and read through them if you like, but that's kind of where I'm figuring out how to do this stuff. But you can see there's a bunch of configurations. We're not going to need all of them, believe it or not. We're not going to need the storage bucket that is created for us by default with Firebase because we have our own storage bucket. And I think this messaging is for the pub/sub functionality that comes with Firebase, but we're not using that because we have our own pub/sub resources that we already created. So I'm going to get rid of those. By the way, your configurations are going to look very different from this, and I'm going to go ahead and delete this project when I'm done. So definitely don't just, copy and paste what I have here. You can see down here, we have initialized our app with these configurations, and this function is imported from Firebase. And I'm now going to make a few more imports. So up above, we can get auth. Yeah, that's exactly what we need. And we're not only going to be getting that, we're actually going to be getting sign in with pop-up, because that's what we're going to be using to sign in with Google. And we're going to get the Google Auth provider that is being suggested to us by a Copilot. And we're going to get a couple others as well. So let me format this. In addition, we're going to get the on auth state changed. That will help us detect if a user has signed in or signed out, and we can update our app accordingly. Like, of course, we would want to probably change the sign in button to maybe a sign out button. And we're also going to import the type, the user interface type from Firebase, because that's going to help us provide some type checking in a bit. But first thing we want to do, now that we've initialized Firebase in general, we want to initialize Firebase Auth. And we can do that pretty easily, like get auth. Well, we're actually not initializing it. We're just getting an instance of the auth variable. And you can see that the type here is implicit. So this is already of auth type. We don't have to put the type here, though we could if we really wanted to, but I'm not going to do that because we're not going to be exposing this outside of this function. That's why I don't have an export here. But now I'm going to create a function just like this comment kind of implies. I'm going to create a function. This one's actually going to be exported. A function. I wish Copilot would shut up. Sometimes it's useful, so I'm not going to turn it off. We're going to do this, and I'm not going to put the return type here because it's kind of implicit, but we're going to use the sign in with pop-up function, and we have to pass in an instance of the auth that we just created, and we can pass in the provider. We don't have to use Google. We actually could have used GitHub if we wanted to, or other providers, and it's just that easy. I think Facebook as well, but in our case, we're only going to use Google because that's what's used on YouTube, but it's really this easy to just create sign in with different providers when you're using Firebase Auth. That's why I'm showing you how to do it using this library. And as you can imagine, if we're going to be signing in, we probably also need to sign out. So I'm going to return auth.signout. And by the way, that's actually returning a promise. So the reason I'm creating these wrapper functions is because I don't want to expose this auth variable to our components. I just want to have very simple interfaces that can be used in those components. And these are promises. So if we really want to, we could await them. But to continue, there's going to be one last function we create. And as the comment implies, this one is actually going to accept a function as the parameter, and I'm going to call that the callback. Copilot is cheating a bit. This callback is going to accept two parameters, well, two types of parameters. It's going to accept one parameter, which is the user, which could be a real user, and that's the type that we imported up above. It's a Firebase user, or it could be a null. So that's what this callback is expected to have as a parameter, and it's going to return void. The return type here isn't important. And the reason we are making it that strict is because this function that Firebase provides to us, it's called auth state changed. We pass in an instance of the auth variable that we created up above, and we pass in some callback, which has to be of this type. So like, I didn't just make this type up. That's like the type that this auth state changed expects. So if we didn't have this here, I'm pretty sure we would get an error. Let's see that. Yeah, we are expected for this to be of that type. And the whole reason I'm creating a wrapper around this again is so that we don't have to expose this auth variable outside of this file. So this will help us kind of react to sign in, sign out changes. And I'm actually going to end the video there. I know we didn't actually get to test out any of this code that we wrote, but the next video is going to be a bit longer, and we're actually going to create a sign-in component and then actually test this out, and we'll take a look at the Firebase console and see how that's being updated as well. So I'll stop this here.